Thank you very much for that presentation. Your work is fascinating and yes, definitely controversial. So I want to start by posing some questions of my own, and then as people get warmed up, they can come and you can stick yourself somewhere in that front row so I can know that you have a question, or you can just line up if it seems like a good opportunity. I'll also stop here and there to check in with our online audience and see if there are questions there. So I guess first I want to start with a pretty big question, and that is that you approach the scholarly tradition simultaneously with reverence and a deep desire to see the traditional scholarship continue into the contemporary period, but also with a willingness to critique it and to look at the scholars as humans in their own historical moments. So I guess I want to hear you speak a little bit about that challenge, the challenge of both deference to the scholars and also sort of responsible criticism. Are there limits to how much we can critique, and then how do you do that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. It's not easy to, because on one level it is easy to critique anybody. Anybody can critique someone, but to critique with love, and maintain respect, and continue to see the humanity and those who you actually are critiquing, as opposed to simply trying to tear them down, trying to put them in context, in historical context, in their own sort of socio-cultural context, and judge them on the standards, first and foremost, that they lived under. There's a tendency today, I think, among people to just assume that we got it all right now, and our own moral sensibilities today can just simply be projected on the past, and we can say, we're going to utilize current modern standards, and we're going to critique and attack those backwards people, those people from the old days who just didn't know what the heck they were doing. They weren't evolved enough, right? That's why they had these views. And I think in particular with regard to Muslim scholars, there's a tendency to think, especially when you come across, let's say, Muslim scholars like other religious scholars historically who have made offensive statements about women or about different racial groups, that we assume that their opinions are just simply informed by, patriarchal sort of presumptions, and so it's some of that in there. Yes, we do have to acknowledge that, but it's not always that. Sometimes scholars they adopt views of other people based upon a commitment to faith. And meaning that they may come across something that they believe to be actually revealed by God, that actually may be from the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, and they want to maintain a commitment to their faith. So if they say, well, the Prophet said it, then it must be true, right? So I know this may be offensive to all those people, but if the Prophet said it, you understand, but not knowing, and most of the time those type of hadiths, of course, they are probably all those hadiths that are that offensive about any particular group usually turn out to be apocryphal. It'd be fabricated, spurious types of hadith. As a matter of fact, in the Qayyim al-Jawziyya, famous scholar, student of Ibn Taymiyyah, he said all the hadiths about blacks are just fabricated. He said any hadith you find that is disparaging of black people, they're just all fabricated. But again, you'll find scholars who might say, it's good enough. Right, they feel like, they're using their methods to authenticate a particular report, and they say, I'm going to adopt this and spread it around. So I think that that's an important part of it too, is that just to understand where people, what's motivating people. It's not just simply this idea that we want to lord over people necessarily. It's not always the case, but I do think that that's an assumption that a lot of people will typically make, and the times we live in. And so when I approach things, I feel like I'm doing an internal critique. I'm not like an outsider's critique where I'm utilizing someone else's standards. I'm using Islamic standards to critique people within our tradition. And most importantly now, and this is that, as I mentioned, that one of the things I wanted to do, I want to humanize scholars. I want to humanize them. I want people to realize that, well, okay, they're not prophets. That the scholars, they are the heirs of the prophets. But there's a difference between being an heir of the prophets and being the prophet. They're still not prophets at the end of the day. You understand? And being they're the heirs, they inherit a type of knowledge. Naturally, they inherit sometimes even a type of spirituality, according to certain types of beliefs, not necessarily that I kind of, sort of adopt that. But it's something that they inherit a particular a legacy that they get from those who come before them. And so I think that when we emphasize that and realize that scholars at times just have opinions, you understand? They have opinions, and I may agree with most of their opinions, but sometimes they have opinions that are just informed by their own socio-cultural context that leads them to, you understand, to kind of be a little bit off there. And so, we can say, I don't really agree with them there on that particular point, and I can continue to appreciate them in other parts. I say, well, we won't, he's not an authority here, but, he said some good stuff over there. It's in the same way, in the Enlightenment thinkers, most Enlightenment thinkers they were racist in their thinking. But would I just dump everybody just because they had racial, that they looked down upon certain groups of people and had certain, sort of blinkered sort of ideas about people, or Abraham Lincoln, he still believed that that African Americans are inferior to white people. But should I knock him because, yeah, I like him because of that, but it's like, yeah, but was it bad that he freed the slaves? I can talk about like why he might have done it. Did he do it because he really wanted slavery to end, or he did it because of political expediency? At the end of the day, that really doesn't matter on one level. He gave his life for a decision, a belief that he had, but he still had ideas about black people that I don't agree with, So I can appreciate one thing about them, or most things about them, and still see the humanity in people. Yeah.
So for most Muslims, obviously the people in this room are more educated than the average Muslim, but even in this room, there might be times when we encounter issues like this in the scholarship where we're troubled by something we read. Right. How does a person without your extensive training deal with those subjects? How do you ascertain whether this is just a scholar's problem or whether this is maybe something that you need to rethink your own? Yeah.
Well, I usually advise people, the first thing is that as a person of faith, that if you're dealing with something that you come across in the Quran or something you come across in the authenticated Sunnah of the Prophet, that if you are troubled by it, then that is, first and foremost, that's not a problem. That you be troubled by something. There are many things that you can be troubled by. There are things in the Quran calls us to do certain things or allow certain things that, a lot of people say, well, I wouldn't do that. For instance, you can marry your cousin. I wouldn't marry my cousin. I'm like, I wouldn't, I couldn't do it. But it's okay to marry your cousin. So sometimes you'll be troubled by things. So that in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. But I think it's important for Muslims, especially, that when we approach the Quran, that we have to surrender to the fact or the belief that we're supposed to have that God is all wise, that God, He knows best. And I may not have the right interpretation right now, right? Or the interpretations I hear may not really fit my fancy, or I guess you say they don't really seem to add up, right? Let's leave fit the fancy out, because, if you're a person of faith, then fitting your fancy really is of no consequence. But it doesn't add up to me. It doesn't seem to really make sense to me, right? Then at least I don't doubt God's wisdom. I don't question God's wisdom. I say, it's okay. Guide me, help me here. Help me on this one, you see. And I think we begin as people of faith. And then we search and we read and whatever, so we'll come across foolish people who are Muslims, a lot of foolish Muslims out there who have very crazy ideas about things as well. But we just try our best not to feel that those people are speaking for God. Right.
Okay. So you've talked about, in your dissertation and in your discussion, you mentioned the issues around different treatments of black women versus